British regulators have concluded the benefits of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine continue to outweigh the risks. The MHRA says there's still no conclusive proof of a link between the jab and rare blood clots, but under 30s will be offered an alternative injection because of a finer balance of risk in younger people. Chair of the Health and Select Committee, Jeremy Hunt, has told LBC it's a sensible measure.
Those statistics you're quoting overall are true, but they do vary a bit by age. And people who are younger are both more likely to get the clotting and less likely to be impacted severely by COVID.
The Prime Minister has urged the vast majority to continue to accept the AstraZeneca jab. Boris Johnson says people should continue to have full confidence in vaccines. The EU's medicines regulator says unusual blood clots should be listed as a very rare side effect of the AstraZeneca jab. A lorry that crashed through safety barriers has been left partially suspended above a major road in Kent. It happened at the side of the M25 where the motorway passes over the A2 near Dartford. People are being told to avoid the routes or leave more time for journeys. Authorities say Tiger Woods was driving at twice the speed limit when he crashed in Los Angeles in February. The golfer was recovering from several operations for serious injuries. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 61 points at 68.85. The pound buys $1.38 and €1.16. LBC weather: patchy rain in some northern and western areas. Another cold night with hill snow in Scotland with a low of -2. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm David Dom.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. Welcome to Cross Question, LBC's political panel debate show every Wednesday at 8. And of course, if you miss one, it's available on the podcast feed as well. Now, joining us tonight are James Sunderland, the Conservative MP for Bracknell. It's his debut on the show. Ben Riley-Smith, political editor of the Daily Telegraph, his debut as well. Christine Jardine has been with us several times before. She is the Liberal Democrat Home Affairs spokesperson. And Emily Thornberry, she's never off the show. Actually, Emily, you haven't been on that recently, have you? But thank you for joining us tonight. Emily Thornberry is Shadow International Development Secretary. So let's crack on with your questions. Now, did I say international development? I meant international trade. That's a really good start, isn't it? Anyway, 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put your questions to our panel.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Emily, I think I demoted you there. I'm sure you'll get your own back over the course of the next hour on me, though. Right, let's go to our first question.
Why?
I don't know. So I don't know which one of you is making me nervous. I think it's Christine, because we had a few technical problems with Christine last week. So. Anyway, let's get on with the first question. Jake is in Brentwood. Hello, Jake.
Hi, Ian. I've just got a question. As a massive football and West Ham fan, with the new vaccine passports that are coming out, how comes, I can get on the train, I can go into the pubs before games, get food and wait in the security lines with all the people that are going to be in the stadium, but as soon as I walk into the stadium, I'm going to need a vaccine passport, and as a young person who might have at least a year's delay, why should I have to wait when I'm going to be with the same people beforehand before I walk in? It just doesn't really make sense.
Emily Thornberry, let's come to you first on this.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jake. I don't think it makes a great deal of sense. I think that there will be certain people who will be excluded from venues, as you say. I think many of the people who have suffered the most have been the young, and they're going to be the last ones to get this vaccine, and they will be the ones who, quite frankly, are missing their social lives more than anything else. More than we middle-aged people who are at home. But certainly my friends who are younger, really desperate to get out and about and see their friends, and the idea that they're going to need to show some sort of passport before they can do so, when they may, as you say, not have had both vaccines. And frankly, even if they have, there will be certain people who won't be able to because they're allergic to it or because they're pregnant. There will be people who will be marginalised. And so I just think that what we're heading for is another test, trace and isolate fiasco, where the Conservatives give their mates an awful lot of money and the system doesn't work properly, and we're all left kind of wondering what on earth is going on. I don't believe that it'll work necessarily. I think it'll be a waste of money. I think that they should be putting their effort into test, trace and isolate and making sure that we can persuade everyone to get vaccinated.
Do you think that individual private businesses should be allowed to ask for some proof of vaccination if they want to? And if a restaurant, for example, decided that it would be good for business if they did this and people could come into their restaurant knowing that they would be secure, would you actually prevent them from doing that? Or is it just a government organised scheme that you would be against?
My instinct is that private people who have a space which they're inviting the public into can put down their own rules on the basis of what, who they will let in and why. But I don't believe that the government should be forcing people to carry vaccine passports, because I think it's the thin end of the wedge. So, we've always known that pubs can be like a private club and can say we won't let people in who are drunk. We won't let people in with dirty boots. We won't let in, et cetera, et cetera. If they want to do this, then I think it'll be difficult to stop them. But I don't think that the government should be encouraging it.
James Sunderland, are you worried about the fact that the government seems to be intent on increasing the powers of the state? It's a pretty unconservative thing to want to do, isn't it?
Yeah, Iain, good evening and hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be on. This is a minefield and there's no easy answer, I'm afraid. But I would urge your listeners to consider one thing. Firstly, that the government's being advised right now by the best brains in the UK. We've got DHSC, we've got SAGE, we've got scientific advisors. We've got some very eminent people who are guiding us all the way. And if the decision at the end of the day is to bring in some kind of vaccination passport, then I would support it because it's probably the right thing to do. But I admit, and I agree with Emily, that this is quite divisive potentially. This is going to be difficult to implement. But I'm afraid I think we have a responsibility to each other. And, if keeping all of us safe, if keeping communities safe, if keeping society safe depends on some kind of vaccination passport, then I'm all for it.
But there has been a lot of mixed messaging on this, hasn't there? I remember a few weeks ago, Nadine Zahawi, the vaccines minister, one day he was saying that there was absolutely no question of vaccines, and then the next day, vaccine passports. The next day, it was a different story. The public can be forgiven for being rather confused by the government stance on this.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think there is a big dichotomy right now in terms of messaging. You've got a situation where we've got the most successful mass vaccination program anywhere in the world in history, which is working to a fantastic degree. And by the same token, of course, we're still urging caution. So I agree that there is a messaging issue here. My particular point is that the advice is changing. It's changing all of the time. We're following the science. We're following the data. This is unprecedented for the country. This is a global pandemic, and it's not easy. It's not easy to find a way through this that keeps everyone happy. So whichever side of the coin you're looking at, there are always going to be those that oppose it. There's the vaccination pro-lobby. There's the anti-vax lobby. No one's ever happy. But the bottom line is that the government's got to plough a furrow here, which keeps the majority of people happy, which keeps the country safe, and which is the right thing to do. And also, we can't look at this in isolation. We are one country amongst many. International travel is a factor here as well. We're part of a global economy. So ultimately, it's about following the science, following what our partners internationally are doing, and coming up with the best possible compromise.
Christine Jardine, your party has already come out against vaccine passports, but when you look at the polls and the surveys that are being carried out, the general public seems to think they might be quite a good idea. I saw one poll showing 60% in favour. Does that not worry you?
Well, I think we have to listen to what Jake said there, which is that, why should he have a vaccine ID card? Let's call them what they are. They're ID cards. Why should he need a vaccine ID card to go into an event when he's allowed to go to that event with all the same people he'll be with? There's, that's illogical. It's not practical. And I have to agree with Emily, it's the thin end of the wedge. You say you need an ID card to go to the cinema. And the cinemas, incidentally, Cinemas UK are against it. And nightlife industries are against it. 70%, they represent clubs and pubs and all the rest of it. 70% of them are against it because it's not practical. It would cost them money. How would you administer it? But the basic principle is you're going to divide society into people who've had the vaccine and people who haven't. And the reality is that most people who haven't had the vaccines are young people. Now, my daughter's 25. I've had my first vaccine. Would I have an ID card and would she be allowed to come with me? She hasn't. She might not get her vaccine for months, maybe another year. So you're going to divide society and you're going to hit the people who have been affected most in this, people who've had the university courses disrupted, their new jobs that they were starting disrupted. They've lost their social lives, as Emily said. They're maybe, just leaving school. They've had the last couple of years of the school disrupted. And you're now going to say to them, well, actually, you need an ID card to get in to a social event. Your friends might have it because they get a vaccine a couple of months later. Families, what's going to happen? Mum and dad want to go to the restaurant down the road for dinner. Do the kids sit outside in the car? Do the kids stay at home?
Those are all very valid points. But what if some scientists, some medical professionals came up with a figure that showed, and I'm just plucking this out of the air, I haven't got no evidence for this whatsoever, but what if they came out with a figure and said, OK, well, if you don't have these vaccine passports, another 5,000 people are going to die?
The key to stopping more people dying is the vaccine. It's not the passport, it's the vaccine. It's having people vaccinated. As James said, we've been hugely successful in this country. And, I admit that, in getting the vaccine rolled out, getting it to people and getting it to people quickly, getting onto the second vaccine and having the population vaccinated is the best protection. It's the best way to get the economy open. It's not the card that might come along after that for those people who've had it. It's getting to the point where we are safer. And I don't buy the international argument because that's a different one. Okay. I have in my passport holder a yellow fever certificate because I need into it some countries in the world. I don't have a problem with that. If you're going to China, I think now you need a rabies certificate. There's all sorts of things. That's different. That's international travel and that's out with our control. But to suggest that the way to, have a healthy community is to, once people are vaccinated, give them a card so they can go to the pub. No, it's be vaccinated and eventually have a test and trace system, which is key. A test and trace system that actually works is key to keeping people safe.
Let's move on. Ben Riley-Smith, what are Telegraph readers telling you about this?
Well, our editorial line, I'm a straight reporter, but in terms of our opinion columns and our editorial pages, they've been quite sceptical, I think it's fair to say. But there are a couple of things I just thought it's worth clarifying on in that debate, because I've reported on this area a fair bit, trying to understand what the government is and isn't proposing. The one thing I think we should say first off is it's not purely a vaccine passport. What they're actually talking about is showing proof for three different things, which would be having a jab, getting a negative test, or having antibodies. And that's kind of critical in the discussion because some of the people on here today said, if it's just a jab, that could be seen as discriminatory because if you can't get it for health reasons or you might be pregnant, you would be barred. The government argues, listen, you can get a negative test, so it's not discriminatory in that way. The second thing, just to go back to what the caller was saying, the government's argument is that in terms of I don't need to do one of these checks to get on the tube, so why should I have to do it to get into a football stadium? Their argument is that they're really interested in it for large events and for kind of opt-in socialising events. So travelling the tube is something a hell of a lot of people have to do for work. That is an essential service, whereas getting into a football stadium or a big comedy venue or a music festival, that's non-essential. And then just the other thing to say, picking up on Emily's point, is businesses can and will do this for themselves. This isn't purely the government forcing it on them. In fact, in the documents they published this week, they said, unless businesses are breaking equality laws, there is nothing to stop them doing this. So it may just become a feature of life, irregardless of what the government does.
I think Jake and I would pick you up on saying that it's not essential to go into football stadiums. I think at the moment it's essential to go into the London Stadium to see West Ham keep in fourth place in the Premier League, isn't it, Jake?
100%. And, I think as well, apologies, I don't remember your name, but you said it's not essential, stadium's a large social event, but everyone that's in the stadium is going to be in the same pub on the same train beforehand, but you don't need a passport at all. So what is the difference when you're going to be literally separated by a single wall that means you're inside the stadium or outside when you're going to be with exactly the same people? So
that's a fair point.
Makes sense to me.
Jake, thank you very much indeed. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. James Sunderland, Emily Thornberry, Christine Jardine and Ben Riley-Smith. And don't forget, if you haven't switched on the Global Player yet, you can watch us in glorious Technicolor. It's coming up to 8:15.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:18 on LBC. Anonymous text here. I've never agreed with Emily before on anything, ever. Cannot agree with her more on this topic, though. So there you are. You've won a fan. Right, let's move on to our next caller. It's Mark in Sevenoaks. Mark, hi, what would you like to ask our panel?
Hi, I'd like to ask whether the Northern Ireland peace process is compatible with Brexit.
Right, let's go to James Sunderland first on this one. Nice, easy one for you, James.
Yes, I wish it was that easy, and it's not. The simple answer is yes, it is. And the reason why I'm saying that is because an awful lot of time and effort has gone into the plan, gone into the protocols. We could talk at length about borders down the Irish Sea. We can talk about the avoidance of a hard border across north and south. But my humble view is that we need to give this a bit of time. So those teething issues that have been reported at the moment, the trading issues, it's not easy. We are going through a divorce. We've gone through a divorce over 4 decades. So this is not going to be an easy fix. But my humble view is that the protocol is about right. It's entirely workable. We've got to get through some of the detail now and give it a bit of time. But once we do
but it's proved to be not workable, which is why the government have unilaterally extended the grace period without even consulting the European Union on it. They've done that for a reason. We know that there are border checks that are not working very smoothly, and we know that over the past 5 or 6 nights in various towns and cities across Northern Ireland, there has been violence on a scale that I don't think many of us would have imagined a few years ago. And this, we're told, is at least in part due to the problems that Brexit has provided for Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, I won't disagree with that. But my only advice would be give it some time. I think the protocols are workable. It's what the people of the UK voted for. We delivered a democratic mandate.
It's a bit limp to say just give it some time, isn't it?
Well, I've got complete faith in the Northern Ireland office. Brandon Lewis and his team are working through this at the moment. They're working really hard with Stormont. They're working really hard with the government in Southern Ireland and really hard with the European Union. And I humbly believe that there's an awful lot of very good work being done behind the scenes to put this right. And I'm very confident that it will be okay in the future.
Emily, I just detect that you might disagree with that.
Well, okay, so cards on the table. So when I did my first Prime Minister's questions, I pointed out that it would be very difficult to work out what the solution to Northern Ireland would be if we didn't remain in the customs union. And the harder the Brexit that we had, the more difficult it is. And we have gone for a very hard Brexit. And obviously the difficulty is that if the northern bit of Ireland is in the UK, and the UK is a long way from the rest of the European Union, then it's difficult to work out how that can work if there isn't some sort of wall or barrier or frontier or border somewhere. Now, a great deal of work has gone into that. It is very hard, but I am in politics because I believe in politics. I believe that political solutions can be found. I don't think that we put ourselves in a very easy position. But I'll tell you this, as somebody with a Northern Irish background, we really have to take this seriously. We can't think to ourselves, oh, it's a long way away. We cannot go back to where we were 20 years ago and all of the troubles that we had and the huge, politics solved the issue, in many ways, or at least got us onto a path that was going in the right direction. We have had a major stumble on the road in terms of the sort of Brexit, I think, that we have decided on, but, we have decided on that, and that's where we are. So we now have to make it work. And there is no excuse for the violence that we're seeing now. There is absolutely outrageous that more than 40 police officers have been injured who've simply been doing their job. There is no excuse for this. We can find a way through. We will find a way through. It will be difficult, but we can do it. And in the meantime, people need to get off the barricades, and just go back into their homes. And we just need to calm things down and find a democratic way through this.
Ben Riley-Smith, I saw a tweet today from the political journalist Darren McCaffrey, who said, and he's from Northern Ireland himself, and he said, if 40 police officers had been injured, if there had been rioting in the streets across England or Scotland or Wales over the last 5 days, it would be headline news. Why isn't this? I mean, we'll come to the main question in a moment, but as a journalist yourself, why isn't this getting more traction?
I agree it should, and I think that to talk about my industry in critical terms, I think it's probably a reflection of how London-centric we can sometimes be, because all of the newspaper headquarters are in London. A huge amount of the reporters in newsrooms in all those major national newspapers sit in London, and I think at times it is difficult to understand and feel very emotively what is happening in other parts of the UK, and that's probably a failing across Fleet Street, and I don't think any papers have massively covered what is happening in Northern Ireland. And I think that is probably a reflection of where journalistic resources, to be entirely frank. And I agree with you and the others on the panel that it should be covered because it's a huge thing that is happening in a critical part of the United Kingdom, and it is deeply concerning what's being seen.
Well, let's go back to the original question from Mark. Is the Northern Ireland peace process compatible with Brexit? I mean, I thought Emily made a really interesting point there, and in a way, slightly optimistic, saying, well, look, there has to be a way through this. We've just got to find it. Do you think there is a way through this?
Sorry,
Ben, I was coming. Yes.
Oh, apologies. Do I think there's a way through this? I think Emily's position is probably the right one, that politics ultimately should win out. I don't really see who wins in either Brussels or London from this current stalemate. Clearly, there is no simple silver bullet, or it would have been found already. And also, clearly, I think David Frost, the new cabinet minister who's leading on these Brexit talks for the Prime Minister, is willing to push a bit harder than Michael Gove did, his predecessor. We saw him play that playbook to get both of the deals, the exit deal and the trade deal that were eventually got with Brussels. I think there tends to be a view in Boris's wider circle that there's no harm pushing a bit harder on Brussels because ultimately that will get you somewhere you want to go. One thing I do wonder, which would be quite explosive, and this is me just speculating, but whether there could come a point that the UK says, well, we're not going to independently do checks on our goods going into Northern Ireland, which they're meant to be doing, and it's up to you, Brussels, to work out whether it's going to be coming across the border or not. Again, that's not based on any sourced information, but you could see that some MPs have argued that to me is one possible option you could go down.
Okay. Christine Jardine, is the Northern Ireland peace process compatible with Brexit?
I think that's the question that has been at the forefront of everybody's minds from day one. I was elected in 2017, and from the very beginning, we talked about Northern Ireland and how did you resolve the issues in Northern Ireland. It's the only place in the United Kingdom with a land border with the European Union. The Good Friday Agreement, I remember the day after the referendum, a friend who's a lawyer said, this puts the Good Friday Agreement at risk. We've known that this was a problem. And Naomi Long said this week that as soon as you decided to have Brexit, as soon as you decided to have a hard Brexit, you were going to have a problem in Northern Ireland as a consequence of it because of the land border. What we have seen this week is dreadful, and there's no excuse for the deaths. And as you say, 40 police officers, injuries, 40 police officers injured in Northern Ireland. It is unacceptable, and our thoughts should be with them and their families. But Emily's right. Politics does find a way. And I'm old enough to remember when we thought there was no solution to the troubles in Northern Ireland. We couldn't see a day when we would be sitting here talking about a Good Friday Agreement that has worked for 2 decades now. So we will find a political solution, and there is really no alternative to finding a political solution. But sorry, Emily, I didn't mean to.
No, all I wanted to say was that I mean, I agree with you, but I think we owe it to the people of Northern Ireland to find a solution, and we also have to always bear in mind that the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted against Brexit as well, which gives it even more of a reason why, as the United Kingdom, we decided on Brexit. We must therefore absolutely find a solution to this.
I mean, we owe it to them, as you say, to find a solution, and there is no alternative to finding a solution.
I never thought I'd hear a Liberal Democrat MP cite Margaret Thatcher saying there is no alternative, but there's always a first time for everything.
It wasn't deliberate.
Mark in Sevenoaks. Okay, James, quickly, and then I'll go back to Mark.
Just very quickly, credit where credit's due. The Good Friday Agreement was a fantastic bit of work. Full credit to Tony Blair, Mo Mowlam and others for getting it sorted. And it's lasted 20 years. It's a good bit of work. So nothing must get in the way of that. And we've seen in history just how bad things get where democracy falls over and we allow violence to thrive. That must never be allowed to happen in Northern Ireland again. So my view is to agree with the other panellists again that politics must win through. Where there's a will, there's a way. I'm absolutely confident that the British government will find a way through this alongside its friends in Ireland and also the European Union. So we need to have faith.
Mark in Sevenoaks, are you? Can you be optimistic in an answer to your own question?
Well, I was speaking to a former army officer who served in Northern Ireland before the peace process came in, before the Good Friday Agreement, came in. And I put it to him, as one of the panellists did, that Boris Johnson has arranged so that he could just indefinitely avoid implementing the border down the Irish Sea, and that instead of getting violence in Northern Ireland, we would get perhaps trade tariffs from the EU. But he disagreed with me. He said that just wouldn't satisfy the rioters, essentially. So I'm not sure I can see any way of dealing with both of these. There seems to be a collision between two referenda where the other referendum was not really considered by the people when voting. And so, as far as I can see, people just have to decide: do they want Brexit, or do they want the peace process in Northern Ireland?
Well, it ought to be a binary choice like that,
because it's a collision between two referendums.
OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed. Keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask our panel a question. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines with David Dom.
Police have now formally identified a body found in a lake in Epping Forest in Essex as that of the missing student Richard Okorogeye. The 19-year-old with sickle cell disease was last seen in West London last month. Boris Johnson says the vast majority of people should continue to take the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine. Everyone under the age of 30 will be offered alternative jabs from Pfizer and Moderna because of a potential link with rare blood clots. A bus has been hijacked and set on fire in West Belfast in the latest disorder to be seen in Northern Ireland. Police say stones have also been thrown at officers and a press photographer has been assaulted. First Minister Arlene Foster has condemned the attack, saying there is no justification for the violence. LBC weather: patchy rain in some northern and western areas, another cold night with hill snow in Scotland with a low of -2.
This is LBC. Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:35. Let me reintroduce my panel to you. James Sunderland is Conservative MP for Bracknell. Emily Thornberry is Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade. Christine Jardine is Liberal Democrat Home Affairs spokeswoman. And Ben Riley-Smith is Political Editor of the Daily Telegraph. A text question here from Kirsty in Dundee. Will today's vaccine news impact vaccine confidence, and how much is the media to blame? Ben Riley-Smith.
Well, of course, the media is totally blameless. No, it's a good question, and it's one that almost on a daily basis we struggle with. How do you accurately report concerns that there is some link, however rare, between some people taking a certain jab and very rare blood clots? In the last couple of weeks, it's been extremely hard to report on because Britain has held firm on its position that it's totally safe for everyone to use, and other European countries have begun raising some of these concerns, and their regulators are acting upon it. I think today the position is clearer from a very long, very detailed briefing, which is there may possibly be some link in some people getting the AstraZeneca Oxford jab and blood clots, but these blood clots are extremely rare. They don't have definitive proof about it yet. And only would they consider changing their guidance, or have they changed their guidance for people under 30 who are so unlikely to get seriously ill with COVID that possibly the risk-benefit situation there may mean it's better for why don't you go for one of the other jabs, is basically where they've ended up at. But certainly from our paper and myself, we really do try as hard as possible to report as accurately as possible, because it's such a sensitive area, and the last thing anybody wants to do is accidentally drive up vaccine hesitancy on something that still today people are saying is overwhelmingly in their benefit to get.
Christine Jardine, you've been incredibly polite not to point out my error throughout the programme describing you as Liberal Democrat Home Affairs spokesman. You are, of course, Treasury spokesperson, so I apologise for that. I'm not having a very good night on jobs. I'm amazed that I've got James Sunderland's constituency right. Now, in terms of the answer to this question, on the vaccine news today, do you fear that could have an impact on vaccine confidence?
I sincerely hope not, and I think that is the important thing. I think the government has been extremely cautious and looked at what is, after all, a rare occurrence. The risk is small, and they've looked at this younger age group where there is less risk from COVID-19, so it becomes closer, if you like. But the important thing is that we shouldn't allow this to in any way make us more hesitant or more resistant to having the vaccination, because it is the key. And I hesitate to draw comparisons, but it is actually, you go through this with drugs. Every single drug, every single vaccine, every medicine that we take has some sort of risk attached to it, and you have to weigh up the balance of that risk. The combined pill, the contraception has a risk of blood clots. Ibuprofen, if you've had major surgery, you shouldn't take ibuprofen. If you are in America and you watch television in America, you would never take as much as a paracetamol or an aspirin again, because they read out the little leaflet that's in the drugs for, aspirin or for everything, and tell you what the risks are associated with that drug for certain people, and you should watch for. So there is a risk with every drug, and what you have to do is balance it out. And what we see is we have this pandemic with this hugely infectious, potentially fatal disease, and a small risk and a small number of people that there will be a side effect, which is a serious side effect when it happens. And I think the government are being rightly very cautious, but to reassure people that they are eliminating any possibility, and we shouldn't in any way let it distract us from what has been an incredibly successful vaccine rollout. We're the most successful country in the world at that. We need to keep working on that and test, trace and isolate, because it's the only way we're going to beat this. I remember my daughter is the age when there was the autism scare about MMR and the damage that did, because It was in some cases reported irresponsibly, but people believed that there was a risk, which in effect there wasn't.
Okay.
And that damaged our immunity to measles, which is very dangerous.
I suspect there's going to be a degree of unanimity on this, so I'm going to ask James and Emily if you can keep your answers fairly short, then we can squeeze an extra question in. James first.
Yeah, very quickly, Ian. I mean, I can't recall a Conservative, Lib Dem, Labour MPs clearly agreeing on these issues, any more divisive questions. This whole business with AstraZeneca has made me quite cross. We've got the most successful vaccination programme in history. Look at our figures. The death rate's dropped off a cliff. It offers 100%, safety improvement against a deadly vaccine, and we're knocking this. The European Union's attacked it and been proven to sort of get that wrong. So my humble view is this. I had my vaccination last week in Bracknell, AstraZeneca, the Prime Minister, many others. This is a divisive argument which has served, and you, Christine, this is served to undermine a fantastic vaccination programme, and you, Ian, and we should be lauding it from the rooftops. We should be knocking it. And this notion about blood clotting, yes, there may be a tiny link, but there's more chance statistically of being killed by lightning than having an adverse reaction to AstraZeneca vaccine. We've got to be lauding it. We've got to be pushing it. We've got to be encouraging the BME community to accept it. This is keeping people alive, fact.
Okay, Emily?
Yeah, I had an AstraZeneca jab as well. I'm heading for my second one next month. And
Ben's too young.
And I will do so with great enthusiasm. I think the experts on this have acted with, what do they say? An abundance of caution. Abundance of caution, and in a measured way when it comes to advice on letting people out after being locked up, about the risks of COVID, about the risks of the vaccine. I mean, the risks of the vaccine are minuscule, has already been said, very, very in a very sort of colourful way, and it's absolutely right. And our duty as politicians is to support the expert opinions, to be completely clear about what it is that we believe should be done, but also to do it too. So the fact that we are all kind of taking AstraZeneca and proud to do so, happy to do so, and in full praise of our National Health Service that has allowed us to all be vaccinated in this way, and will roll out a programme to everyone. And obviously the concern is that if the under 30s are not to get AstraZeneca vaccine, will it hold matters up? Well, clearly that decision has been made, that there will be other vaccines available and they will be able to get that vaccine instead. I just hope that it doesn't take too long, because there is an abundance, thankfully, in our country of AstraZeneca vaccine.
Well, let me just say, after 9 o'clock, we have Dr. Sarah Jarvis joining us for the whole hour to take your calls on today's news. She will be able to offer you, hopefully, any reassurance that you need. So we'll be taking your calls on the vaccine after 9 o'clock, any questions that you have. Right, let's move on to a totally different subject. Tony is in Doncaster. Hello, Tony.
Hello, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
Well, I'd like to direct my question, if I can, to James Sunderland. And
well, we don't direct questions to one particular panellist. It goes to all of them.
Well, they can all join in. Okay. So, is it the case that this government is turning its back on the world?
What makes you think that?
Well, we've got no relationship with Russia. We're involved in a slanging match with China. We've set our face against Europe. Arm's length relationship at the moment with the USA.
Okay, so basically, global.
Why is all going on?
James Sunderland, global Britain, it's an illusion.
Yeah.
No, I disagree completely. In fact, the opposite is true. Here we are as a newly sovereign, newly independent nation, having broken free from the shackles of the European Union. We're doing the complete opposite. We're reaching out to countries all over the world. We've got fantastic new trade deals in the pipeline. We are leading the way with the green agenda. We've got a new defence agreement. We are forming relationships with NATO and the European Union. We've got the Five Powers Agreement in the Far East Pacific. We've got transatlantic agreements going on. I mean, it's the complete opposite. We've got a fantastic Foreign Office. We've got diplomats all over the world working really, really hard to forge and cement British interests across the world. And I think that now is a great time to be British.
Okay, you haven't got a flag behind you, though. I'm rather disappointed, James. I thought all Tory MPs had to have flags behind them nowadays. Brief answers again, if you will, please, Christine.
Being Scottish, I think it's always a great time to be British. But one of the things that this government has done in turning its back against the world is that it's turning its back against it on, soft diplomacy and international development in a way when, democracy across the world is under threat at the moment. We're seeing the rioting in the streets in Myanmar. We're seeing the attitude of the Chinese government. And yet we're seeing this government turn its back and not help at a time when we really need to be making our presence felt on the world stage.
Emily?
You will have to cut me off. So I'm just going to start talking, Ian, and then you'll have to cut me off. Right?
Okay.
Because I have
You've never ever said that to me before.
And the situation is this. First of all, I don't want to disappoint you, James, but you do need to know the truth, which is that when it comes to trade deals, we have not had a trade deal that has earned us one extra single penny more than we had when we were in the European Union, as things stand at the moment. We have various fantasies. We think that we might get a deal with the United States. This is not going to happen in the near future. I heard the business secretary saying that he thought that we were going to get one in a few months. That is simply not true. It is right that we have always been a great internationalist nation, and we must maintain our position as that. We have a position on the Security Council. We are given various jobs to do as being part of the Security Council. So, for example, we're supposed to be there helping to sort out Myanmar. How's that going? We're supposed to be helping to sort out what's happening in Yemen. Well, what are we doing there? We're selling arms to Saudi Arabia. That's what our role is in relation to that. The fact of the matter is that, of course, we are an internationalist country. We are absolutely, and it is based on trade, and it is based on our international outlook, and, proud to be like that. But we also need, therefore, to act multilaterally and to act with our friends who have similar values to ourselves. And that means that we stand up for our friends when they are being, like, for example, if you look at what's happening in Australia at the moment, they are simply getting a public punishment beating almost by the Chinese in what the Chinese are doing in relation to trade there. Have we said anything in support of that? Have we done anything to support the Australians? No. Are the Australians finding any other friends? No, they're not. When it came to Canada, all Canada said to Saudi Arabia was, it's all very well you letting women drive, but would you like to let all the women who were in demonstrations to let women drive out of the prisons? And what happened? The Saudi Arabians came down heavy on them. Did we stand with Canada? No, we didn't. So simply waving a flag and saying great international Britain, great global Britain, it's actually somewhat empty. It's what you do is what's
the Dale guillotine is about to fall.
We should be doing if we're going to be true internationalists.
I think the difference is that the country, as Emily says, Britain hasn't turned its back on the world. We all want to be internationalists. It's the government. It's this Conservative government that's turned its back on the world.
Yeah, two very quick points. I think Britain is engaging with the world in a different way from what it was 5 years ago, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Clearly, we're less in lockstep with Europe by simply the fact that we're no longer in that bloc. And what you saw in the big strategy document published last month is very explicitly the government is saying we are going to tilt to the Indo-Pacific. So the Prime Minister is due to fly out to India in a couple of weeks. COVID cases there are surging, so possibly there's a chance that might be cancelled. But they are very deliberately trying to re-engage or engage further with the Indo-Pacific. And just a second point, picking up on what Tony said, I wouldn't underestimate how desperate the government is to be close and have as good ties as possible with Washington. I was in Washington for 3.5 years until January. You would not believe the amount of engagement that has constantly been pumped out from our Washington embassy there. It's almost like a mini government department. And they were very keen to get close and influence Trump as much as possible. And they are very keen to get close and influence Joe Biden as much as possible. So I think there's definitely a lot of engagement on that front still happening.
We have a really, really good British ambassador in Washington. I mean, she is absolutely first rate. And I wish her all good. Yeah, and I wish her all good luck because with the new regime in Washington, we will need to start gaining their trust, because, there we were first friends of Trump, and it's a little bit difficult with the new regime to kind of see that we can change our spots in the way that it may look like we've done. But we have done so much damage to ourselves by cutting the amount of international trade, international aid from 0.7 to 0.5. We were world leaders on that. I think we've done ourselves huge damage in cutting the BBC World Service. Frankly, there are so many things that,
the guillotine is about to fall again, Emily, I'm afraid. We will come back to your questions in a moment, but I got some very sad breaking news to bring you. A body found in a pond in Essex has been confirmed as the London student Richard Okorogeye. It's 10 to 9.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 8:54. Let's go to our next caller, who's James in Ayrshire. Hello, James.
Good evening, Ian. Ian, can I ask your panel whether they consider that every eligible adult in the UK should have not one jab, but 2 jabs before the idea of vaccine passports is even mooted?
Well, that is what the government, I think I'm right in saying, is suggesting. Christine Jardine, let's come to you first.
Well, I wouldn't want the idea of vaccine passports or vaccine ID cards to be mooted at all, as we said earlier, because I don't think that is the way that we open up the economy and we protect people from COVID-19. The way we do that is through this wonderfully effective vaccine rollout we've got and test, trace and isolate. That's the way we do it. It's nothing to do with vaccine ID cards. And I think to go down that route is to go down the wrong one.
Do you think that by the end of the year we will have the whole country opened up and we will have some semblance of normality again? Or do you think that there are going to be some sort of restrictions ongoing for quite some time to come?
I don't want to tempt fate, Ian, because we all want to see the country opened up again. We all thought we were going to have Christmas, and here we haven't even had Easter. So I think I don't want to tempt fate, but of course that's what we all want to see. That's what we're all working towards. We all want to see. I walk down the main street in the part of Edinburgh where I live in Corstorphine, and the hairdressers are opened up this week, but until this week the hairdressers, the dry cleaners, shoe shops, everything was closed, and that tells you how bad the economy is.
Okay.
We've had horrific death tolls. We all want to see the country opened up, and the way to do it is to have us all vaccinated and test, trace and isolate, and that's what
all right, Ben.
Well, I'm always wary of gazing into the crystal ball, but as a reporter, you watch what the government ministers and the government scientists are saying quite carefully, and every couple of weeks we get a bit more indication about what's coming. And I think these are the critical things they've said recently. 1, COVID is not going to go away and it is going to be with us for a very long time. Everybody at the top of government is now saying that publicly. 2, in the documents they published, the vaccines are not 100% effective at stopping any illness or any transmission, according to the information. And added to that, we're not expecting 100% of adults and children to be vaccinated. So there is going to be a degree of cases being passed around for a large amount of time. And then see just this aspect of COVID checks. Some private companies already doing them. The government is clearly open to helping or even requiring some other events to do them. So when you add all those things together, the idea that maybe we had at the beginning of the year that just when we get to the end of the roadmap at the end of June, everything will go back to identical normality of 2019. I don't think that's going to happen.
But I don't
Christine, we're running out of time, I'm afraid. I want to get James and Emily in. James, next, please.
Very quickly, I've not heard that 2 jabs are going to be required. I get my second jab in the middle of June. I'm a 50-year-old male, so quite clearly it's going to take quite some time to vaccinate the entire population with 2 jabs. We need to open up comprehensively much earlier than that. And my second point, very briefly, is this. We've got to learn to live alongside COVID. Yes, it's going to be here for a while, but we've got a very successful vaccination programme. We've got to take a bit more risk here because the economy, our livelihoods, our kids, our schools, our businesses all demand that we open up at the earliest possible opportunity. And I'm going to be fighting quite hard for that in Westminster.
Emily?
So I think whether or not we open up the country will depend very largely on what happens internationally. And I think that some pretty important decisions need to be made in the near future in order to ensure that the world, and not just Britain, is vaccinated. I think that as a country, we have the advantage of excellent advice. We have fabulous scientists. We have a wonderful National Health Service, but we don't have a government that is particularly good at making decisions or clear at making clear what decisions they have made. So when we're asked, should the government be offering, should there be two vaccines offered before we start asking for a vaccine passport? We don't really know, because we don't know what the government's plan is, because they're not very good at making clear what their decisions are and then communicating those decisions once they've done it. We have many advantages in the country. Unfortunately, there are some obvious disadvantages.
I'm going to finish off with two text questions. One is aimed squarely at Emily. It's Paul in Italy says, I won't be voting Labour anytime soon, but Emily Thornberry has come across very well tonight. Has Labour missed its chance of her leadership? I mean, we can leave that as a rhetorical question, or if you would like to offer an answer to that, Emily.
I'll answer it.
I think that the Labour Party very clearly decided that they wanted to have Keir Starmer as their leader, and he is doing an excellent job in very difficult circumstances. And as we come out of the pandemic, we will see what a good leader he will be.
Now, if you were in the studio with me now, Emily, you might slap me when I ask this next text question. In his diaries, Sir Alan Duncan calls Emily Thornberry a graceless frump. What's the worst insult you've each ever received? James Sunderland.
Ian, clearly as a new MP, I'm in that honeymoon period. So I've had a very lucky run in my 16 months so far, but no doubt the abuse will start at some point.
Mate, you're on Twitter. You must have had some.
I ignore Twitter because it's just empty vessels making the most noise.
Okay, very wise. Ben Riley-Smith.
I mean, I get so many every day on Twitter. I don't think I can specify one particularly. I mean, we're endlessly accused of being either a Tory stooge or a kind of liberal sycophant. So, not one immediately springs to mind, but I'm sure I'll get some tomorrow.
Well, two very weak answers so far. I'm relying on you, Christine.
Well, I'm afraid mine came from Rishi Sunak in a statement in the House of Commons when he suggested I was a member of the Scottish National Party simply because of my accent. Now, being a Scot at the moment, regardless, if whichever side you're on, to be suggested that you're on the other one, particularly by a political opponent, was quite something else. I was too taken aback, I think, to answer, and I think the only person in the chamber at the time who was almost as offended as me was Annalise Dodds, the Labour Shadow Chancellor, who's from Aberdeenshire. I knew how much of an insult it was.
Well, we missed a trick tonight. I think producer heads are going to have to roll because it is the 87th birthday of the SNP today, so we can all rejoice in singing happy, but no, maybe not.
No,
Emily Thornberry, how offended were you by Alan Duncan's comment?
Water of a duck's back, mate. You should see the Twitter feed. My God. Can you imagine? I'm left wing, I'm female, I'm mouthy, I've got a lot to say, I'm overweight, I won't shut up. Imagine the abuse I get. Just imagine. So I've stopped watching the incoming, and frankly, this is nothing compared to some of the stuff that.
I think my worst one was when I was called a veteran broadcaster. That really hurt, I can tell you. So I've only been doing it for 10 years, but anyway, listen, thank you so much to all four of you for joining us tonight. James Sunderland, Christine Jardine, Ben Riley-Smith and Emily Thornberry. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, people under the age of 30 are to be offered an alternative jab to the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine. The UK regulator says the evidence is firming up a possible link between the injection and very rare blood clots. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor